Hello everyone, my name is Shani Jones and this is KNKY, which stands for Know the New Kinky You. I'm your resident certified sex coach and we are here to finish off our series on sex as a transition in different phases of our social lives. And this is the part where we are talking about sex while married and or in a long-term committed relationship. So, have you ever asked yourself why they could call it a honeymoon phase? Well, you're coming off this high, especially if you're married. There's the ceremony where you've been married to the love of your life and you have nothing but the future ahead of you. You have dreams that will turn into plans and then they'll turn into what you hope to be the rest of your life. Everybody's marriage experience is going to be different. So while dating, you're sorting out all of the things that you like and dislike about a person, all of the things that you love about them, and those that you perhaps are just willing to tolerate. I believe we end up with the person that kind of we can deal with the most. I could be twisted, I don't know. So, if you find that there's aspects of a relationship that you can't see living the rest of your life with, you kind of tend to break up and you move on to the next person. But once you actually do find that one person that defies all of the reasons why you shouldn't be together, you put yourself in a position to say, I do. So again, we talked about it in the last video. The honeymoon phase lasts about 2 years. And this is an approximation. Don't go looking at your calendar and saying, oh, we're about 2 years and a couple months, so I'm expecting a problem. No, it's really just a guesstimate based off of previous research. So this is the time where, in this honeymoon phase, where you're learning each other, especially as a newly married couple. Because of course, as most people will agree, that things change after you get married. Now, I will put it out there. I've never been married. I have, been in a long-term relationship. But the stories that I'm about to tell you, again, are not my first-hand accounts, but they are accounts based off of my relationships with other married people and my perspective on how those relationships kind of manifested. Now, I have this one couple that comes to mind, and this is a couple that I kind of would have liked to have emulated if I could go back another 20 years. This couple, they met in grade school, and although I'm sure the relationship wasn't perfect, they have been married for over 50 years and they are still together. What I know is that he was her first. I don't believe that she was his first, but he was her first, and she, to my knowledge, has never been with anyone else ever. So they grew as a couple and became companions and friends. And they maintained a fairly active sex life even through moments of drought. They have children and grandchildren, and they are likely to live out the rest of their lives as husband and wife. And that's the story that I would hope most of us would be able to tell, meeting the love of your life very young and having a lifespan to share with them and to grow with them. I would have liked to have that. That's not going to happen for me. However, actually I'm thinking of another couple that I went to high school with that are like that. So I believe in possibility, and I know that it's possible for future versions of us to be able to find that. Being married, at least in my opinion, is a contractual obligation to be accountable for another person. And it's the responsibilities kind of defined the constructs of how it is that we manage our relationships. We have to decide what is allowable and what is not allowable in our marriage, because it's not going to be the same for every couple. So, and I say this as I think about another couple that are actually, I really appreciate them, because when I threw my launch event for KNKY last year, they came. And, you know, these are both very highly intelligent people. They have good education, good jobs. They love their children. They are a strong family unit. And it's one of the most genuine things that I think that I've been exposed to. Now, when I launched Kinky KNKY last year, we played a version of a Kinky Newlywed Game. And they, along with another couple, were basically the highlight of the event, in my opinion, because they were so open and candid about the things that they enjoyed as sexual people. Their sex life is active and interesting and evolving. They didn't put limits on themselves and were always willing to try new things. They also participate in lifestyle activities. And on occasion, they both enjoy bringing someone else into their sexual adventures. The only limits they put, the only limits that they had on themselves were the ones that they established. And I don't think that there were probably too many limits in that regard. This is not to say that they did not have, or they don't have, because they're still together, they don't have issues in their relationship. But what it says is that they have enough love and respect for each other that they are willing to work through anything together. There's no shame or judgment in their relationship. And it helps to support my belief that when you have a strong foundation and you work together as partners, anything is possible, sexually or otherwise, because there's trust and there's communication. Now, I know another couple who were together for a very long time, but that communication didn't exist, and neither did the respect. Little issues became big issues that compounded to on top of one another. Initially, while they were dating, the sex was explosive and freaky, and but once they got married, things changed. I have not done an assessment of them, and this is definitely psychology, but I would chalk it up to what is called a Madonna whore complex. This is when a man can feel and act with a woman doing very sexual things as long as she's not his wife, or they're not in a committed relationship. Once they find themselves bound to each other, his image of her changes, and she becomes this Madonna, this pure motherly person. And so the things that he used to do with her are no longer acceptable. You cannot treat your wife like a whore in this paradigm. So over the course of years, little issues still became big issues, but there also became an imbalance of emotional, financial, and sexual contributions that eventually led to a breakup. And this isn't something that happened overnight. There were attempts to mend the relationship, especially for their child, but certain behaviors just didn't change. He wasn't the sexual person that he was with her when they first met, and her sex drive didn't change. She still wanted that, but there were other influences in their lives that hindered it. And it was even that much more devastating when she found out that he was expressing his sexual interest over the internet. I think in this case and many others, bad sex is a predictor of what's to come. When you stop having sex and everything else is also strained, intimacy disappears. And it's harder to hold on to a connection with the person that you love. Now, this last scenario, it actually applies to multiple people that I know in relationships, and they all have their slight deviations, but we're generalizing this for the purposes of this conversation. All of these people that I'm talking about are also, highly educated, professional couples that have children. Now, you get married when you're young and you're hopeful and you have a promised future ahead of you. And you get married with the best intentions. You take seriously, for better or for worse, through sickness and health, till death do us part. You are wanting to start your life together in each other's company. Sex perhaps is frequent and exciting and satisfying. But eventually you find that you might start a family, progressing your careers, and then priorities kind of just start to shift. And sex can really change after you have kids, which it becomes more strategic and less spontaneous. And we'll talk about that more in a future video. But in general, life just starts to get in the way. So you're focused on your career and how to make the most of it. You start to focus on family and taking care of your household. You worry about bills and making sure that you have enough of an income to pay them without struggling. Over time, it becomes less about you as a couple as it does about you as business partners, keeping this relationship afloat. Eventually, the time that you used to spend together can kind of turn into time you spend in the same room. You don't interact as you used to. You don't engage the way you used to. Communication is not about you as a couple, but you as adults who are responsible for the things in your life. And there is a difference between intimacy and sex, because intimacy can start to fade, and then as intimacy fades, so does sex. Intimate moments are those when you can look at each other in the eye and just feel the love that you have for each other, or you become physically aroused just by being in their presence, or when you have a softer touch, and that touch, creates a spark that generates a shiver throughout your body. It's about feeling safe and protected and knowing that that person is there for you. Intimacy is a key factor in a strong sex life. And when both intimacy and sex dissipate, you truly become roommates. In this scenario, you're married to a good person. They're good parents, and they contribute to different aspects of the relationship. But you've lost that certain spark. You find that you've created a situation where you want to maintain a level of normalcy. And when this happens, it's typical to sustain just so your children can thrive. And eventually you put your own wants and desires on the back burner. And I've talked about this before, where, there is a concept of a wheel of life, and how we have to figure out a way to balance all of the things that are important to us and give them equal weight so that nothing kind of just falls to the wayside. And what we find is that in a lot of cases, sex is that thing that is the first to go when you have to find time for something else. When it goes on the back burner, one or both of you in the relationship can become resentful or perhaps numb. And it's not uncommon for there to be whispers of an affair. Whether that affair be physical or emotional, if something is lacking in your marriage or your long-term relationship, you have to be willing to fight for it, to regain it, so that people don't look elsewhere for what they're really trying to get from you. When people have affairs, they're really trying to supplement their lives. They're trying to fill a hole. And this is not 100%. Don't get me wrong. There are people that just cheat because they want to. But let's build on the scenario that we're talking about. You have an emotionally deprived, a physically deprived person that is looking for affection, and what they'll do is they will find that affection in someone else if they're not finding it in their partner. So you want to try to get ahead of it so that you are not in a situation where you have to go your separate ways. These types of situations are very, very complicated. Just like any troubled marriage or relationship, long-term commitments are an investment in ourselves and our partners. It's not always easy to give that up. And so you should want to fight for it. You should want to put every effort into making it work. Sometimes not all is lost. Sometimes you just need a little help to regain the spark and to rebuild that connection that you once had. Every marriage, every long-term relationship is different. I will say it again, because each of us is different as a person, and we contribute to the success or the demise of our relationships in our own way. The key is accountability and taking responsibility for our actions or inactions. We need to recognize when things are shifting in a way we don't want them to, and be willing to acknowledge it for what it is and put in the work that goes to get it back. Now, for some of us, it's just not possible to regain what we've lost. All I'm saying is give it a best shot. Put some effort into trying. And if you find yourself at that fork in the road, and our fork is a 3-pronged fork because we have what is called the 3-door strategy. Behind door number 1, you do nothing. Your situation stays exactly the same, nothing changes, and you just are forced to deal with it. Behind door number 2, we are talking about change. And what I mean is real change. You are willing to work together towards building a better future. And behind door number 3, we're talking about walking away. You have to decide whether you want to terminate your relationship. You recognize you can do all that you can. You recognize that you've done all that you can do, and the situation is not something that you can sustain any longer. It means being honest with yourself and your partner and figuring out next steps. Now, as far as my personal belief in marriage, I've gone back and forth over the years. You know, there was a point where I was just not a fan of marriage just because of all of the work that it took. You can go out, get married in no time, but if you want to get a divorce, you got to go through all this hoopla. And I'm just like, it's not worth it. I can have a civil ceremony and just be done. And if I decide this isn't working out, okay, we'll just be done. Ideally, if I had my ideal situation, just because in my day life I deal with contracts and understand procurement, where a marriage, ideally in my opinion, would have a base contract with option year renewals, and you would review it at regular intervals, and if everything is great, passive approval, move on to the next phase. If things aren't great, you do a performance review, you figure out what the issues are, and if both parties sign off on it, it's dissolved, no issues. It doesn't mean that you shouldn't have done the work ahead of time to make sure that you weren't going to be in that position, but this is me. This is how, if I was in charge of marriage laws, that is what I would recommend. There are about 60% of marriages where they are considered sexless. That means that a couple engages in sexual activity less than 4 times or less per year. And a lot of times you really just find this imbalance in sexual desire and frequency. One person wants it more than the other person, and we don't find ways to compromise and figure out how to make it work for both people. That typically leaves one partner unsatisfied and weighing their options on how to receive that sexual gratification, which again goes back to our earlier conversation about infidelity and cheating. All marriages are different. I know I've said it, but I say it because I don't want you to think that I am trying to define what your relationship looks like. I'm not. I'm trying to give you very generic templates of stories that I've heard about married people and what they kind of go through. As married people and people in long-term relationships, we have to navigate these relationships on a number of different factors. And it's really up to us to decide how much we put into it. So I'll suggest that if you are in a relationship and sex is not exactly what you want it to be, and if you really want to do something about it, communicate it to your partner. It's not fair to them for them to be left in the dark about your feelings. And it's also important for the partner receiving this information to be open and willing to meet halfway. That is what compromise is, meeting to a point that is mutually beneficial for everyone involved. If you think you still need help, you can always work with a coach. Feel free to send me a direct message and let me know how it is, what you're trying to achieve, and we can work together to figure out how best to make that happen. This is the end of our series, and I hope you found it interesting. I would love to hear your perspective on your stories or other stories that you know about people that are married or in committed relationships and what sex means for them. If you missed any part of this video, please feel free to go back and watch it. It's here on YouTube just for you. Don't forget to like. Don't forget to subscribe. You can follow me across all social media at DOYOUKNKY. Be on the lookout for new content, and I will see you again soon. Thank you.